Welcome to The Grind and Glow.
Real talk, real estate, real life.
I'm Kathy Garcia.
And I'm Meagan Black. We're two unlikely friends turned business partners bringing you real, unfiltered conversations about the real estate world and the wild ride that comes with it.
From industry highs and lows to behind the scene moments you won't believe, we're here to keep it fun, relatable, and refreshingly real.
Expect laughs, lessons, and a little chaos along the way.
Because in real estate and life, things don't always go as planned.
Let's get real. Let's talk real estate. Let's dive in. You guys, we're super excited to welcome our awesome guest, Heather Leah. She is a historical journalist here in the Triangle, and I am seriously super excited to have her on and learn some history.
We met a few months ago, almost a year ago. A good friend of ours had a listing out in Chatham County, and you gave us so much history. I didn't know, I had zero idea what was underneath Jordan Lake. So I am so excited that you're here. So Meagan and I were, not from North Carolina.
Nope.
So anytime I hear stuff like this, I think it's so fun. And tell us, where do we begin?
Just tell you history.
You did mention you are from Raleigh, so maybe share a little bit about who you are and all that fun stuff.
Sure, yeah. So I am a 5th generation Raleighite, 7th generation North Carolinian, but up to 5 generations ago, before that, Raleigh didn't exist. But there was still plenty of North Carolina. Raleigh wasn't here yet. Yeah. Raleigh was actually a latecomer onto the game, built specifically to be the capital because of our proximity to a tavern that politicians liked.
That is exactly why we're here.
Why we are here. We're all like, really? We can't get by our seat.
So alcohol is really part of the history of Raleigh. It was a big factor in why Raleigh is here. Interestingly, Cary was the opposite. It was built as a prohibitionist type background for their community, and now there's so many breweries in downtown Cary. I'm like, oh boy, our founders are rolling over.
They did not remember.
I've lived in Raleigh my whole life. I moved away to Asheville for school, but I grew up, born and raised here in Raleigh. Yeah. My grandmother lived in Raleigh her whole life, 92 years, and the place where she grew up is actually not far from here, Western Boulevard and Avon Ferry, and her home is gone now, but it was a farm when she was growing up, and of course now it's Western Boulevard.
Isn't
right?
that crazy?
So Centennial Campus, I think, is what's there now. So she would always tell me, we were driving around that over there used to be a baseball stadium, or that over there used to be a NASCAR track, and today it's a big building, and you would never know. And so I started to kind of get interested in the story of what was here before. And then my dad got me really into exploring abandoned places, and they just kind of meshed.
I actually just saw you exploring some underground tunnels.
There's tunnels. So first of all, I tell people you're pretty much always walking over top of some kind of piece of lost history, and you just don't know it. I love to play a game where I stand somewhere say in Raleigh or Durham, and I go, what was here 50 years ago? What was here 100 years ago? What was in this exact same spot 500 years ago? And that's a really fun game for me to play. And tunnels are a big part of what I do. It's interesting that I get paid to explore underground tunnels and ghost towns and things like that. I was crawling around in some probably about century-old brick tunnels that are under downtown
How did
Durham.
they find them, or is just...
How do I find these places? Sometimes people tell me about them.
Okay.
So I'll tell you a fun story that I really like. Okay. So I used to do history trolley tours through downtown Raleigh.
Love that.
And I would take people to these abandoned hidden places and tell them about it. And I'd heard all these stories that under Fayetteville Street was a speakeasy from the 1920s, right under Fayetteville Street. And I was like, man, that'd be cool if it were true. But I'd never seen any proof. I'd never seen evidence. No pictures, no archival images, just nothing to prove that it was true. And then one day I get a call because there's renovations underneath the Sir Walter Apartments. Well, those apartments are senior living now, or at least they were at the time.
Are you talking about down the street here?
Yeah, just down the street. Yeah, literally like a few paces away.
Yes.
So it used to be that it was a big hotel, a grand old hotel, and that hotel was where all the politicians and wealthy, influential people would stay when they came into town to go to the Capitol. They would then just walk and stay at the hotel. Well, of course, during Prohibition in the 1920s, you know, a silly thing like alcohol being illegal wasn't going to stop you if you were rich or if you were influential. So that hotel, now apartments, called me and they said, we were renovating and we busted down a wall and found a door behind it. And would you want to come look at it? And I was like, yeah. So
I'm already in my car.
I got to go down there. I know. I was like, I'm on my way. And sure enough, we get down there and there's this drywall has just been busted down. I've got a picture of it. Yeah. And you can walk right through the drywall into a little alcove area. And there's this wooden old door. And you open it into this pitch black room full of it's got a bar. It's got seating. It's got like all the old seats and the booths, and it's got like a mirror on the wall, and it's got the hardwood floors, and it's completely dust like this thick.
That is so cool.
And sure enough, I was like, well, there's the proof. There it is.
So cool.
So we found it.
What did they do with it? Did you just kind of leave it there? Or?
As far as I know, their plan at the time, this was a few years ago, was to destroy it and build a tavern or a speakeasy under there. And I was like, oh, I wish you would just restore the one that you have right here. I bet people would love to come see it. But they were renovating that whole basement area to make room for like restaurants and shops and things. So I guess they probably gutted it. But I got pictures, and you know, for a while I was on the Raleigh Historic Development Commission as a commissioner for the city for 4 years. That's 2 terms. And my job was to help save historic sites. But if you aren't a landmark, there's nothing we can really do to prevent it from being torn down because it's not protected status. Right. So I can all day long cry about it and say, please don't, but it's not a historic landmark, so it's not protected.
And we are in downtown Raleigh, so as we're walking around, you will see those landmarks throughout the area. So that's very cool. I didn't know that. That's very cool.
I recently went on a ghost tour.
Cool.
Yeah, it was really cool, actually. And the guy was talking about there being a lot of tunnels like under the Capitol.
Yeah. I haven't been in those. Man, I want to if I ever get a chance. So I have heard that there are tunnels under the Capitol, and that they go to the governor's mansion, and that they go to historic Oakwood, the neighborhood. That maybe one of the houses had a tunnel that went right into there, and I think maybe one of the churches. But again, that's one of those legends I've heard, but I've never seen, so I can't confirm. If I ever can, believe me, it'll be all over.
It'll be in a book?
Yeah, it'll be in a book. Actually, the Mary Oaks, the that you were mentioning, that's how I met you. That is in the book that I'm working on. I'm doing a book on ghost towns and lost communities of North Carolina, and I actually spoke to some of the people who grew up out there, and they were able to share their memories and how it's felt to be part of a community that it's been watching its history get taken away piece by piece over the past 100 years or so. It certainly hasn't started recently. It's been an ongoing thing. And you know how much that piece of land means to them. And then I know they're fighting right now to save their church, but I think they have lost the fight, and they told me that the church is going to get torn down to widen the highway. So a lot of history, if I can save it, I try to save it, but if I can't save it, pictures, write down the story, make sure the voices are captured somewhere and held.
Right. If you can't save it, record it.
That's right. Yeah. So that's a lot of what I try to do. If I can draw attention to something that saves it, that's awesome. And there's been times where I've drawn a lot of attention to certain historic sites that end up getting torn down anyway, right?
Well, you drew a lot of attention to Mary Oaks.
You sure did.
So when we went to Mary Oaks, so you guys can kind of know what Mary Oaks is, Heather was telling us about the area, so kind of tell the people.
Yeah, so first of all, Mary Oaks is this absolutely, it looks like a ghost town, right? This section of it, right? Now, Mary Oaks is a community that in its heyday, it was about a mile square, and it was a railroad town. And the railroad still goes through out there, right? So this was a railroad town, and it really blossomed around this railroad and this old railroad hotel, the Edwards Hotel, which is part of the property that's for sale now. This big, when you go out there to look at it, and it drew a lot of attention because of the visuals, right?
Yeah.
It's this big picture, like a stretch of a village, and you can own your own village, right? It's a big yellow 1800s grand house.
Yes.
Beautiful wraparound porch. And then it's got right beside it the general store. This was Yates and Thomas General Store. Looks just like something from a movie, right? It's wooden and it's tall and it's got these doors and these. It just absolutely looks like something you would see in an old-timey movie or like maybe a Western. And then it's got the post office on the other side of it. That's a smaller building. And it used to have, I believe, a railroad depot, but that got old and it eventually kind of fell in on itself. But this stretch was the heart of Merry Oaks during the early 1900s. That's what I've been told by the people who grew up there, that this was this part that's now for sale. And you can buy your own village for less than the cost of many houses in Raleigh. And you get this whole stretch of land. So I went through it and I explored all the beautiful buildings and the history that's out there, and of course wrote about the history of this town, which was this railroad town. And the railroad, people would come all the way from Raleigh, and people used the railroad to, the farmers made a lot of money on that railroad. They'd put their lumber on that railroad and ship it to Raleigh, who could just never get enough lumber because Raleigh's building. So Merry Oaks was flourishing based on this railroad they had going through. In fact, some ghost towns that exist today exist because the railroad missed them, and then they just withered. As soon as the railroad went away, they just, as soon as they didn't get a railroad, they withered because the railroad was where all the money came from. But Merry Oaks got the railroad, so they were flourishing. And kind of the sad story of a lot of places in rural North Carolina is if they start to get a lot of popularity, then developers want to come there. And, it's a balance, right? You want to grow and you want to get developed to a certain point, but sometimes you end up losing your history. And Merry Oaks has just been right on that line where they've lost a lot of history. And at one point, they had the first public school in Chatham County. Whoa, and it was this beautiful big school, but lightning struck and it caught on fire and burned down. So, there's... Anyway, today, if you go out there, it kind of looks like an abandoned village, and it's beautiful. It's like frozen in time.
It does, yeah, literally. I mean, you walk upstairs.
It looks like it's a set to a movie or something, right?
Does. Yeah. Yes. And we did that story, and I mean, that story went national. I mean, I was getting emails from all over the country, and worse, I was like, hey, you should probably let people come see it because they're going to go see it anyway at this point.
Well, they had an open house, and I think she said they had
I was there and another colleague of ours. I mean, it was lines, and I think it was during a holiday weekend, so people were coming with their kids, and it was like a history tour, and it was a really great experience. But what you mentioned also when you were out there about Jordan Lake, so can you touch on that? And you also mentioned a book, so we'll get into that, but talk to us about Jordan Lake. I had no clue.
Okay, so first of all, Jordan Lake has a ghost town underneath it. That's the short of it, right? That's the short story there. A lot of people don't know. Thousands of people are out there boating over that lake, hiking around the shores, and have no idea that there was an entire community dating all the way back to the 1700s. And then even before that, the Tuscarora were on that land. So first of all, can blow your mind a little bit more. Literally. Most of North Carolina's big lakes have ghost towns underneath them. Wow. So it's not just Jordan Lake. It's Lake Norman and Charlotte, Fontana in the mountains, Roanoke Rapids Lake, Falls Lake. All of these lakes have ghost towns underneath them, basically.
That's so crazy.
In varying states of being torn down versus some of them still have structures standing under the lake, from my understanding. So, and then like Carr Lake has a train underneath it, like an entire train. The engine and like 3 cars are just under that lake from a crash in the 1900s. They never got the train up. And then there's an airplane under Lake Norman. So there'll be a book.
We're like,
I know. Like if you guys could see our mouths.
We're like, brain explodes.
So there'll be a book about that. But Jordan Lake specifically was the first one I learned about too.
Okay.
You know, I grew up in Raleigh, and I would learn things like, oh, did you know that underneath the Village District there's an abandoned underground mall? And I'm like, what? Right? I've been
Wait, is
there
that true?
Yeah. That was my first big viral story, was that one.
That's
Like,
crazy.
Over 10 years ago. Yeah. Oh, gosh. We'll get Jordan Lake.
We're all over the
Village District is, you know, this kind of boutique-y shopping area.
Yeah.
And I remember learning, I found blueprints. That's how I discovered this one. I found blueprints underneath. It was called Cameron Village at the time.
Yeah.
But found blueprints that underneath the former Cameron Village, that there was like all these shops, and it was like there was like an arcade and a radio shop and like a wallet shop, and
Wow.
you know, and then all these bars and clubs were all under there, and I was like, is this real?
Yeah.
I remember being probably like 22, 23 when I found that, and we were like, is it still down there? And we were trying to line up the blueprints with the modern day shopping center and trying to figure out like where these places were. And then I heard from my mom, who worked in one of the stores there, that she's like, you know what, there is an old-timey crank elevator in our back room. It goes down. So I said, oh my goodness. So, and there was like virtually no pictures or anything of what this place looked like. There was one website, Goodnight Raleigh, that had like maybe 2 photos, and so I got a sense that there's what it looks like. And because, you know, back then people didn't have cell phones in their pockets, so we didn't have as much. Anyway, so I did a story about, did you know this was down here? This was way before I was working for the news. I had my own website called Candid Slice that I was doing with my dad and some friends. And I was like, did you know this is down there? I can't believe it, right? And then I started hearing, I mean, it got 1,000 readers, 2,000 readers, 50,000 readers, 100,000 readers, 500,000 readers, 1 million readers.
Wow.
And then like the news called me up, and I got to go see it for myself and
That's
get
so
pictures.
cool.
And,
Wow.
and so, and by the way, the people who decorated, it's called the Village Subway, and it is still down there. The people who decorated it partially using items from the houses beneath Jordan Lake, because they went there in the 70s and were stealing from these abandoned houses.
Oh gosh.
That's so interesting, like how history intertwines
Connected.
like that.
I know.
It's connected. But to take it back to Jordan Lake, and I'm sorry I'm talking a lot.
No,
No,
we're
no,
excited
but
just
I
as
love
you are.
history.
Yeah.
So I found out, another surprise, right? It's always a surprise for me too, even though I'm, you know, been living here my whole life. Maybe it's more of a surprise because I'm like, what? I was like, I found out that Jordan Lake had like a ghost town under it, and I was like, what? No way, Jordan Lake? Like I've been over that a million times, and so I did some research. I found a gentleman. Unfortunately, he's passed away, but he was the director of. It's a railway museum in
Okay.
Bonsall near Apex. Really cool place to explore. And he told me all about what it was like. And several communities were flooded. And that basically in the 1700s, it was known as the New Hope Valley. And there was a river. And people settled, the European settlers came in and they settled in that valley because it was rich and lush. The soil was just perfect for growing. And there was a lot of battles between the European settlers coming in and the Tuscarora, right? There was some strain there, obviously, right? Because the Tuscarora were already there. Right. Ultimately, I mean, we know the history, the Tuscarora were pushed away. In many cases violently, or, you know, and so there's a lot of that history also under the lake. And when they made the lake, I know they did a dig and they found a bunch of artifacts. And
Wow.
I'm not 100% sure on this, but I've been told that there were maybe some burial mounds and things in the area too.
I can imagine so.
Yeah, I would think so. But
It would only make sense.
it would, but I haven't like confirmed that, but I've been told that by several sources. And anyways, so then the settlers come in, and initially it was a terrible place because you couldn't cross it very easily. There was no bridge. And so if you reached the valley, you had to either go all the way north around it or all the way south around it. And so a lot of settlers just stopped on the edge of the valley. And then this one really unlucky farmer inherited land on both sides of the valley. And he was like, how am I supposed to farm on both sides when it takes a day to get around each way?
Yeah.
So he had to build a bridge. But it ended up being a really stroke of luck for him, because then he made people pay to cross the bridge, and everybody would. And he built a tavern, and it was called Cypert's Tavern. And it really started to flourish in that area. And then the communities that were living there in the 1960s and 70s, when it was flooded, had been there for generations at that point. And several of the towns, Seaforth, Pea Ridge, were completely lost, along with a way of life that I talked to some of the people who lived down there, and they grew up down there, and it was so many stories about like the farmers. They were tobacco farmers. Everyone farmed tobacco, and they would get together and like have one day where they would like prepare the pigs, right? And it was like the hog killing. And then they would all get together, and every farmer in the valley would come help the one farmer do it that day. And it would be from 3 a.m. until midnight. And then they would cook you a big, big meal, and everyone would eat that meal together. And it was the best, most home-cooked food. And everybody was growing their own food and making their own food. And there was a way of life under there that was washed away.
Quite literally.
Quite literally.
Yeah.
And what year was, because you said 1960s?
Yeah, so it flooded. The area had a problem with flooding because it's in a valley with a river. And that's part of why the land is so good, right? You get this lush land, but you also get floods.
Right.
There was a hurricane that came through that was sort of the final disaster. I believe that was the 1940s. And that's when the government was like, all right, we're officially going to put a dam here. And it was for flood control. That's right, it was the 40s. And I found out, I talked to some of the rangers up there at Jordan Lake. So there's two sides to the story, right? People losing their homes and a lot of sacrifice. But without the flood control, whenever we had these hurricanes, and this is the 1940s, World War II, right? The flooding is going downriver, and it's affecting Fayetteville. And Fayetteville and the soldiers down there are getting flooded out during a war.
Right.
So it became extra priority, and they went ahead and were like, let's go ahead and start on this project. Interestingly, they didn't actually really start on the project until the 60s. It took time to go around and knock on all the doors and say, hey, we're going to take your land. So,
minor detail.
Eminent domain.
which, that's, So
Did they at least place these families in other areas, or was it up to them?
It was up to them, yeah. Okay. So they got paid. There's so many sides of this story where the families will say they certainly were not paid enough. Of course, the government will say they certainly were paid enough.
Sure.
It definitely was an eminent domain situation, so they didn't get a choice.
Right.
Sure. Yep.
Right.
And, some of them, had loved ones buried in the backyard, and they couldn't find their graves. They're probably still under the lake. And so there was some serious
There's
loss.
a lot there.
Some people moved their homes. Other people's homes were torn down. And now, when the lake water goes down low, as we discovered this past summer, you can see the ruins that are under the lake.
Wow.
Yeah, so I heard we had a drought, and I heard the water levels were low, and I was like, well, I have to go see if this is, if it's what I hope it is. And so, so we drove down there, and if you drive over 64, and that's a big bridge that goes over the lake, you can look down, and you can see old 64 in the lake.
You need to share these photos with us.
I
We'd
will.
love to put them up on our podcast.
Yeah,
and
I'll share them with you.
page. That is so cool.
Yeah.
I
cool.
follow you constantly. I feel like a stalker a little bit.
So where's she at today?
Yeah, I'm like, what's she got going on? So what is your book about?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. So it's about ghost towns and lost communities of North Carolina. And originally, I was like, hey, I want to do a book. I've always wanted to do a book. And I thought I would just do basically a hidden history in a book form. But once I started working on this book, I realized this was going to be more than just, oh yeah, here's a ghost town, here's what it looks like, here's what it was like in its heyday, and here's why it was lost, and here's how you can go explore it. That is the core of the book, right? If you want to go explore some ghost towns, here's where they are. And most of them are things that you can actually go visit yourself,
That's
right?
cool.
They're ones that are either open to the public or are in a place that is public land, right? That you can go explore. We explored the ghost towns around the Eno River. which also that was almost completely flooded, and we would have lost all that history too.
Wow.
But the Eno River has all these old 1800s houses off the hiking trails. Umstead Park has a whole farming community ruins out there in the woods.
I'm like an avid Eno hiker, and so when you say that, I'm like, what are you talking about?
Oh no, you need to go look
give
for
her the
these
coordinates.
places.
Yeah, I can't wait to get your book.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Seriously.
Well, I'll show you some pictures. There's a ton around the Eno. The Eno has, first of all, it's got a bunch of these old log cabins built in the 1800s. They started settling that river in the 1700s as well. Before European settlers came, I know the Eno tribe was living out there. And I believe the Okanichi tribe, I might not be pronouncing that correctly, and if so, I'm sorry. But I want to at least mention them, even if I can't pronounce it properly. But I hope I did it right. Yeah. So there were tribes living out there. Again, if you see a river, there's probably ghost towns, right?
Wow.
If you see a river, there's probably graves. So Eno River has several of these old log cabins that have survived in the woods, and they're just standing. You can go look inside them. I wouldn't walk around too much in them, but they're unstable. There's like the Cole house, and then there's Sister's house, which is like caved in, and it's very eerie to me. But I think he built it for his sister because I think she like never got married or had kids, and so that was like the worst fate for a woman back then. Yeah. So because women weren't allowed to own property.
Right.
Oh
Man.
yeah.
But anyway,
right.
Eno has a lot. There's also an old cemetery out there, the Cave Land's supposed to be very haunted. There's
Okay, I'm gonna say haunted stuff because I want to ask about this.
I've got a lot of ghost stories. A lot.
Tell me, like, okay, so you have probably seen, heard, visited. What would you say is one of those areas that you're like, man, this is haunted? Because I love it.
Yeah.
But I'm also scared.
Okay,
But
so
I would love to know that.
I will tell you, I've been to a lot of ghost places.
Yeah.
Hidden history, haunted history comes with it. There's a couple of places in Raleigh that I would say definitely give me the chills. So if you've been to the Mordecai house, that one is it's got a whole ghost story about it, about the woman of the house from the early 1900s, that she still lives there, and apparently the piano plays by itself. You can hear it inside the house even when it's all locked up, that she's in there playing the piano. And that sometimes a woman in a gray 1800s dress, or maybe early 1900s dress, stands out on the balcony overlooking downtown, and you can see her as you're going by. My cousin got married there, and he does believe he saw the ghost because a girl walked by with long black hair, and she was wearing an old gray dress, and she had just walked around the corner, and he didn't think anything of it. He assumed it was maybe a friend of, someone's friend's bride's friend's friend or something, right? But she had just walked around the corner, and he was like, oh, no, that's the wrong way. And so then when he went back around to chase her to tell her, no, you're going the wrong way, she was gone.
Wow.
And then he asked his wife later, he's like, did you have a friend who had like long dark hair here or not? Do you know who that is? And no one knew who that was. So he thinks that was the ghost. I think that place, I get eerie vibes from there. Another one that really creeps me out, and I'll tell you the most scary one last. But
tell me.
Another one that really creeps me out, it just gives me chills to be there. It's not really a scary, well, it is a scary story, a sad story. There's this, what is it called? It's like a smokestack, and it's at NC State, and it's got the name of the old name of the college on it. And apparently a student fell down there and passed away like decades ago, according to the legend. And you can see like a body like hanging from up there at night. So that one creeps me out. One more, the Ratcliffe Angel, and then I'll tell you the spookiest one to me. The Ratcliffe Angel, I know why there's a ghost story around her. It's because you can see her from the road, but she's in Oakwood Cemetery.
I just got chills.
I know, like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean you can see her from the road?
So okay, there's Etta Ratcliffe is a woman who's buried, and she happens to have, her headstone is this like full-sized angel. And it's quite creepy when you're going down the road and you see like the shadow of this big angel like right through the trees, and she's like kind of framed by the trees, and it gives me chills just thinking about it. It's kind of an eerie look, and according to legend, people have said they'll be like walking by and at night and they'll see her like turn her head and look at them.
Oh, gosh.
Or like move her eyes. And I did a story about, well, actually my cousin did a story about her for my website. And her like great-great-grandkids emailed us, and they were so excited. They said, "Oh my God, we didn't know all this about great-great-grandma. We've never met her, and it's so cool to hear she's a ghost story." Like, oh gosh! So the family was really in support of this ghost story. But the one that I think is the most haunted place in Raleigh, possibly in Wake County, maybe even beyond.
Yeah.
And I hope no one gets too mad at me for saying it, but I think it's Dix Park.
Yeah, I can see that.
And the reason is that land has kind of just a painful history dating back hundreds of years. So originally that land belonged to indigenous tribes, right? And that's why even today they'll do like a powwow out on the land as part of like Dix Park has different things they do out there to try and honor the history, right? Mm-hmm. So of course we have indigenous tribes that have been pushed off the land, right?
Unfortunately.
Right. So there's your first, not great, right? Sad, painful history. Mm-hmm. Then it's a plantation. And it's a plantation, the Spring Hill plantation. The plantation house is still standing out there today.
Wow.
It's the Spring Hill house. It's being used. Last I checked, NC State's using it. And it's like some kind of student center. So you have a plantation house. Mm-hmm. And the man who owned the house, he's still buried in the backyard, and it's the oldest known grave in Wake County is right out there in Dix Park behind his house. And there's several other graves that have been found around his grave, but they're not marked, and we don't know exactly who's buried there. It could be family members. It could be people he had enslaved.
Sure.
But it's a plantation, so there's more painful history, right? And there's graves, unmarked graves. Of people who don't have their names remembered.
Yep.
Yeah. So sad.
Then it becomes, I'm trying to think what came next. I think it became Dorothea Dix. Mm-hmm. Now, Dorothea Dix, mental health has come a long way. But in the early days, mental health treatments weren't great, right?
Yeah.
You have electroshock therapy. Now, again, these are things I've been told, but I've been told from people who went into the buildings at Dorothea Dix that they found like chains on the walls, things like that. So, again, I don't know. I'm not a Dorothea Dix historian, but that's what I've been told. Certainly adds to the eeriness of it. What I do know is that if you were a woman, you could be forced to go there by your husband. Wow. If he just said that you were crazy, they would accept that and they would take you. So there were women who were forced to go there. There's a cemetery at Dix with a bunch of graves. I believe they've cleaned the markers, but for a while those markers were completely covered. But they're in the ground. You can't really see them. Okay. It looks like a field, but it's markers. There's at least 600, I believe, out there.
Oh, my goodness.
And these are people that weren't claimed by their families.
Oh, no.
So you have more graves of people who aren't being properly remembered.
Yeah.
Then it becomes an orphanage.
Oh, my gosh.
And the orphanage also had a school. My great-grandfather, I believe, went to that school. And he lived in that area. And even he had stories about creepy things happening to him while he was walking home at night.
Yeah.
And my grandmother doesn't believe in ghosts, but she believed his stories. Yeah. She was like, that land is something's wrong out there.
Right.
So he would be walking around there, and he had people, like, shadow people following him, right? Mm-hmm. So during the time of the orphanage, there were 2 fires. And during the first fire, there were, I believe it was 2, but it might have been 3 children who died. Mm-hmm. They died trying to jump out of the window to escape the fire. One of them, I believe, just died on... I'm trying to remember the story. It's been a while. I know that at least one of them, the kids were at the bottom holding a bed, and the kid jumped and he missed the bed and he just hit the ground. So there was some death there. Mm-hmm. And then legends have spun up around the fires because there for a while was like this burnt kind of gutted looking building out there. And so people came up with legends around the building and like made up stories about what happened there. Mm-hmm. And there became a legend called Crybaby Lane. And so in the 60s and 70s, people would go out there to the abandoned building and they would tell these ghost stories, right? And so it got more of a legend. Mm-hmm. But I do know that I read a story in the News and Observer about the graveyard for the orphanage. People don't know what happened to it. Yeah. Is it still out there, unmarked, or were the bodies moved and exhumed and sent somewhere else? We don't know. So there's some more graves that are just kind of gone.
That's crazy.
So it's that land has this constant history of like pain and suffering and death, and there are people buried out there who are just kind of these
lost souls.
Yeah. And so there's all kinds of legends about what happens out there, and there's a million ghost stories you could tell, but I honestly think telling the story of the actual history of the land is perhaps the most haunting
I know.
thing.
Yeah,
so that's definitely, when I tell people the most haunted place, I would say that one, because there's a lot, and we did go out there when I was younger and did some ghost experiments, and we brought equipment and gear.
Yeah.
And we did see, things showed up in our photos, and we did
crazy.
We did I wouldn't recommend anyone doing this, but we did a Ouija board thing.
Tell me about what I'm like.
Kathy is very.
I know.
This was many years ago, and I would not recommend doing this. But we did have activity with that Ouija board.
Wow.
We also found cold spots. Like, there was a lot. Now, the ghostly legends that came up around the 70s were that if you went down Bellevue Street, so it's different now, it's been reoriented out there, but at the time, Bellevue Street dead-ended at sort of the entrance to the orphanage, and you could, according to legend, people who lived in that part of Raleigh said that they would smell sulfur coming from the old building. So for a while, there's an old burnt down building standing out there being creepy. Right. You can see how ghost stories would spin up around that.
Especially because it's an orphanage.
It's right. Yeah. Yes.
And a plantation.
Yeah.
Did they move the kids somewhere else, or were they just kind of kids living like just different areas?
That's a great question. I don't know. And I don't know if it was actively an orphanage by the time it burned down. Yeah. Because it was an orphanage. We're talking early 1900s.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way we handle children who don't have their biological parents has kind of changed since then.
Right.
Oh, and the Spring Hill house, also on that land, that has a whole ghost story where the people who work in security out there claim that we've talked to them, they claim that the alarm keeps going off inside the house when it's closed up at night, and they'll rush out there and nothing's ever there. Yeah. And the alarms keep getting tripped in such a pattern that it seems like someone could be walking down the stairs and out the back door. We think the legend is that it could be the man who owned the house originally walking out to his grave and then back in, kind of repeating these patterns.
Yeah.
I want to say, when it comes to ghost stories, because it always comes up, people want to know about the ghost stories.
Mm-hmm.
I love to talk about ghostly legends and history because at a certain point, a legend becomes part of your town's culture. It becomes part of the character of your town. So I don't think that ghost stories are just like a waste or just a silly story. I think that it doesn't matter if they're real or not real, or if ghosts are real or not real. It's more about these stories have become part of the culture of our city that makes Raleigh unique. The fact that, there's a gray lady at the Mordecai house, or there's, Crybaby Lane, and there's a smell of sulfur from the orphanage. These stories become part of what makes our city interesting and unique. And, the Etta Ratcliffe Angel, and her family loved it, right? So I think you have to be careful, because ghost stories tend to come out of tragedy. So you don't want to be disrespectful to the tragedy and the people who were lost. But at the same time, the stories usually are not directly related to the tragedy. They are spurned out of it. I think it's interesting to look at where ghost stories originated and where is the exact moment where this actual history became a ghost story. And in my ghost tours, I usually kind of look at that line.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my opinion, it's almost like another way to maintain the history. It's like people are trying to, for lack of better terminology, like hold on to it a little bit.
They are, and I'm going to give a shout out to the Ghost Guild, because I feel like they do that really well. They're constantly getting invited to historic houses, and they'll examine, they'll do their paranormal research there. But again, it's not about if there's a ghost or not a ghost.
Yeah.
The stories they tell and the people watching their work, they end up learning about history as kind of a side effect.
Yeah,
so
that's
I think
super
it's
cool.
just
That's
be
very
respectful, but I think these stories are a good way to keep people who wouldn't traditionally want to listen to history,
Yeah,
but then you tell them a ghost story and they're like, okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, I just went on a ghost tour, like, literally, like, a week and a half ago, because, I'm not super, like, oh, ghost tours, but at the same time, I was like, I want to learn more about the history of Raleigh, and I did. I learned so much on that ghost tour. It was like maybe like an hour long, and the whole entire time, I'm like, yeah, like, tell me what's going on, tell me what's going on. He's like, this is the legend, like, this is the actual history, and he did a really good job as well he was, one of the things that he was telling me, and I don't know what's true or what's not, but he was talking about the Capitol, and, like, on the 3rd floor, there's, like, a light on that's not supposed to be on. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know that one, but I know Capitol ghost stories, definitely.
Yeah.
That's really cool, too. Yeah. I've heard that you could hear the footsteps on the stairwells. And the stairways and some of the places still, like, show, like, the markings of where the people were walking. And then I've heard that you can hear voices coming from, like, the chamber, almost like the politicians are still meeting and they don't know that they're gone. No, the Capitol burned down. Like, we lost our entire Capitol originally, and this one's a new one. So
yeah, he was telling me about it. He was saying how the Capitol was built to be, it's like one of the nicest capitals in the country because it was, like, built to be in that time. That was the goal. He's talking about the marble.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because the original one, they lost it, right? And so they're like, well, we need to get serious.
Yeah.
I believe, don't totally quote me on this, I believe the original one definitely had a lot of wood, and so they went with marble for the second time around.
It won't burn down.
Yeah, they're like, okay, we're going to protect it this time around.
Yeah, well, I feel like we have learned so much today.
I know. I feel like there could be part 5 to this.
Yeah. This is not going to be your last time here, hopefully. So we really appreciate you having you on, and thank you so much.
We learned so much.
I always love coming and talking about history. So
and thank you for respecting the culture of people.
Yeah,
thank you for including the Native Americans and just respecting the history and.
Well, I definitely try. I didn't get to, I was talking about this briefly, but I think that with the book, what I want to do is really hear the voices of the people who these communities are gone now, and so they can't really speak for themselves anymore, right? And so trying to find original sources of the people that lived there and then talking to people who remember it, because it's more than just here's this cool place you can explore. I really want this history to live on as much as it can. So
yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I look forward to reading your book. It's going to be out in, you said, about 6 months?
Probably, I'm hoping we're thinking around October.
Nice.
So there'll be a post for sure.
Yeah.
We are so excited.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Follow us, and I'll definitely be sharing it when her book comes live. And where can the people find you?
Oh, yeah. So I guess the easiest way to find me right now is my website. It's www.hiddenhistorian.com, and that has all my channels: YouTube, TikTok, Facebook. You can find me anywhere. It's all linked on that website.
Perfect. Well, if you guys have any hidden history that you know of, reach out to Heather or reach out to us so she can maintain that history. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yes.
So see you guys later. Adios.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.